Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-American Podcast. My name is Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, alongside Bill Bender, lead college football writer at sportingnews.com. It's our Tuesday edition here at CFB Nation. We're going to bump up our shows for Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday, we're going to look back a little bit, see what's going on during the week. Wednesday, we will look ahead, and we will preview the upcoming games. You can catch Bill Bender when you are not listening to this podcast. He writes for sportingnews.com, does his picks against the spread every week, does his bowl projections every week, overreacts every week. Bill, you've been known to overreact, have you not?
No, this week, not so much. I mean, there wasn't that much during the week. I mean, I know Georgia looked human. I know Alabama, had the Bryce Young injury, but it looks like he's going to be okay. So, it was a fun weekend. I think week 5, I mean, we're already almost to midseason. We'll have our midseason All-Americans at Sporting News pretty soon, which just made me kind of do a double take yesterday that we're already getting to that point in the season.
It is amazing how fast it goes. No question about it. It's amazing how fast coaches can go from not on the hot seat to getting the pink slip. And that's what happened on Sunday night. We'll start with our weekly fired coaches intro, because it has happened after week 2, week 3, week 4, and now week 5. Sunday morning, it was Karl Dorrell at Colorado. Not really a surprise. Sunday night, it was Paul Chryst at Wisconsin. Definitely a surprise for me. Very out of character for Wisconsin. They had not fired a football coach since 1989. They had not fired a coach in season ever. And it just seems to me that in college football, the environment right now, you're not allowed to have a bad season. You're not allowed to have a bad month.
Well, yeah, but we talked about this last week a little bit and wrote about it at Sporting News. I just think that the hiring cycle begins when the season starts. And instead of November, when you would see some coaches get let go in November, they've just pushed the calendar up 2 months like everything else in life. Wisconsin was a surprise, but maybe not as much to me, just after I left the Ohio State game and just struck at, they weren't even on close to Ohio State's level. And this was a team for a quarter century that Ohio State that was a tough game for both. I mean, that was Ohio State would go up to Madison. It'd be a tough game. When Wisconsin would come into the shoe, you knew it was going to be physical, but Ohio State dominated them physically on both sides. So, and then they lose to Brett Bielema, who their former coach. And anytime the former coach comes in and smacks you around, yeah, I'm sure they had this conversation. So, which comes to the next part, Bill, is like, to me, if this is a Jim Leonhard audition, that's fine. He's young. He's been there forever. He's had a top 10 defense for several years. But I just see more of the same. Like, I see more of the same there. Like, are they going to at least reevaluate how they have the quarterback play there? Are they going to change their offensive philosophy? If they don't, I still see more of the same. They'll get back to like that Paul Chryst level of 10 wins, but no closer to being. They're the best program in the country that hasn't played in the playoff. I can say that. The record says that. But but they're also the best program in the country that doesn't seem like they're close to a playoff appearance.
Now, is there a worry that Wisconsin could turn into Nebraska? Nebraska fired Bo Pelini, almost had the exact same record as Paul Chryst. They're kind of just good, not great, not good enough.
Right.
And they are not in a recruiting hotbed. And they have what you would think from the outside overachieved for a while. And after Pelini left Nebraska, everybody knows they've been in purgatory for 10 years. Could the same thing happen to Wisconsin?
Yes, maybe. I don't know. I think they have a quarter century foundation of solid football. I mean, I don't think they'll go back to the days before Alvarez where they're 3-9, but they could slip into average pretty quick because, their tradition is rest on offensive linemen, which they've recruited well. When we did that list of top programs in the country this summer that we always do at Sporting News, the top 16 programs, and we have the statistical formula that's super nerdy that I put into the spreadsheet. Wisconsin finished 9th. So it's like I've been telling you and others at Sporting News, this is a very good program, but they just don't look the same. And so, I mean, to me, it becomes a question of, okay, if Jim Leonhard does this for a half season and you don't like it, go get Lance Leopold. Because if you don't, Nebraska is. And that's a very interesting I think I'm going to convince you that I need to write about this week is what is the best play for Lance Leopold? Is it stay at Kansas? Is it go to Nebraska? Or is it go to Wisconsin? And I think all three of those doors are attractive for him. But, I just worry that they're going to do more of the same. And more of the same to me is good enough to win 9 games, but not good enough to get to the college football playoff. Maybe in a 12-teamer, but, that they'll be that chronic one and done once they do that.
Yeah, the thing about Jim Leonhard and giving him a trial run, it's like when you run a program, recruiting is X% important, 75%. Some people would say 90%. Some people would say he's not going to recruit during the season. His job right now is to keep the team together, put game plans together, and elevate the play on the field. But the recruiting piece is so important, and it's hard to evaluate a coach who becomes head coach on October 3rd in 2 months, what kind of a recruiter he's going to be. His defenses have been great over the years. They've gotten a lot of talent and gotten a lot out of the players that they have recruited. But to me, the Washington State case last year when Jack Dickert took over and Rolovich was let go and he was the interim coach, and that was a difficult situation for Washington State in terms of trying to keep the program together. Rolovich left under ugly circumstances. Leach had left not too long before. Dickert rallied the group, and I don't know how many great candidates Wazoo was going to get. So my point is keeping Dickert in that situation made sense to me. I don't know how much this Leonhard trial, over the next 2 months, evaluating what kind of a head coach he's going to be of, like you said, a top 10 program. I'm not sure how much you're going to figure out in the next 2 months.
Yeah. What are you going to learn from, here's their schedule, Bill. Let's do this real quick. Northwestern win, right? Should be. Northwestern. Yes. Michigan State at Michigan State. Should be. Then Purdue at home. They'll probably lose that game. Purdue gives them fits. Maryland at home. Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, or Minnesota. And they'll probably go best case like 5-2, worst case 3-4. So that I don't know what we learned there. There's not a team on there because whether these coaches or whether these programs in the Big Ten admit it or not, you are judged on how you do against Ohio State and Michigan. And probably Penn State. It wouldn't have hurt if they had Penn State on the schedule there to see how he does against one of those teams. And that was something that Paul Chryst had slipped. Last year they lose to Penn State at home. They lose to Michigan at home. They just we just talked about the last 2 times they've gone to Columbus, they've just gotten blown out. So I think it's a better job than Nebraska. I do. But you hit on the recruiting. If you look at the recruiting right now, Nebraska has the 48th best class and Wisconsin has the 55th best class. Nothing's going to change for either one of those programs until they change the way they do that. You nailed that 100%.
We could talk Wisconsin over and over, but let's move on. I looked back at my preseason hot seat story where we had 7 names on the list. Chryst was not on it, of course. Frost, Herm Edwards, and Jeff Collins are out. Those 3 of those names were out, and Brian Harsin, of course, at Auburn, still hanging in there, but clearly still on the hot seat. But there are 3 other names that were on my preseason hot seat list I want to just at least mention real quick. Dino Babers, Chip Kelly, and Mike Norvell at Florida State. Dino Babers, undefeated at Syracuse. Chip Kelly, undefeated at UCLA. And Mike Norvell, 4-1 at Florida State. Bill, how have they done it?
First of all, 4 out of 7, very good. 3 out of 7, and then you're going to get a 4th one fired probably very soon.
3.5.
Well, I mean, the easy answer for Syracuse is they've got a great quarterback running back combination. They've had a little bit of luck. I mean, they probably shouldn't schedule Wagner again after last week. We don't need to see that game again. But heading into a bye week and really maybe Clemson's biggest challenge in the ACC, which we didn't think would be possible. I think Florida State, despite the loss last week, he's going to get them to a bowl game. They're going to move up into the top half of the Atlantic, and that's an example of where patience isn't the worst thing. Mike Norvell's got them going. I think UCLA has been the most impressive. I know you're a big Chip Kelly fan. I'm always kind of on the fence with him, but 41.4 points per game. DTR looks awesome. Defense is better. They're equipped to play in a Pac-12, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, how a lot of teams can score a lot of points in that conference, and UCLA's equipped to do that. So I've probably been most impressed with UCLA, even though every week we're talking about how few people are in the stands. I mean, for them to do what they're doing, it's been pretty impressive. So that's my call to UCLA students. Get off the beach and get in the stadium a little bit. Help your team out. I probably wouldn't get off the beach, though.
I mean, it's tough, right? It's tough. But they're going to have a great one this weekend. And it's at noon out in L.A., I think, or noon or 12:30. I think it's noon. So they can hit the beach for a late afternoon cocktail after the football game, right?
Right. Yeah.
UCLA is a good example of a school showing some patience, though, right? When you talk about the coaching, I mean, it's taken Chip a little while. He went 3-9, 4-8, and then 3-4 in the pandemic season. Last year, 8-4. This year, 5-0. So it took a while, and every case is different, but this time it looks like some patience paid off.
Right. I mean, and for sure, and that's good for the program. It's good for Chip Kelly. It's good for the program because, barring whatever goes on with the legal circumstances, they're going to go to the Big Ten. So I think they've also increased their national profile just in time, because it was easy to forget about UCLA. I mean, they really haven't been on the national radar in a while, like in terms of like in the hunt. I mean, I have to go like all the way back to like Cade McNown, where I'm like,
long time.
They are in the national championship hunt and a serious contender. So that's good. And DTR is a good story of, it's kind of like how Scott Frost was married to Martinez at Nebraska. Chip Kelly and DTR have been together for a long time at UCLA, and it's good to see him have some success. That said, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow, they're in trouble against Utah, man. Utah's really good. I've been watching them every week. That's going to be a fun game this weekend.
Yes, absolutely. Can't wait for that one. Alabama survives at Arkansas. Georgia almost loses to Missouri, and the AP voters bumped Georgia from number 1 to number 2. Alabama becomes the number 1 team. Again, extremely close vote. Only 2 points separating Alabama and Georgia, but Alabama is the new number 1. You've seen both of them several times. You've seen them play well. You've seen them struggle a little bit. Neutral field tomorrow afternoon. Bill, Georgia, Alabama, who you got?
I would probably pick Alabama. I know we had this discussion Saturday night before we put out playoff picture, and I think if the committee was voting this week, they would probably put Alabama number 1. I think they would go Alabama 1, Georgia 2, Ohio State 3, but the way that those votes would be parsed out would be pretty close. Alabama's averaging over 8 yards per play since the Texas game. They've found some explosiveness in the offense with Gibbs. They found it without Bryce Young. I guess to answer your question, you have to tell me exactly what's going on with Bryce Young's shoulder before I make my pick, but sounds like he'll be okay. I can't put a finger on what could be quote unquote wrong with Georgia. The stats check out, right? Their defense is still good. Their offense is still running the ball better than, I was like, maybe they're not running the ball. Maybe Stetson Bennett's doing this. I just think it's a product, Bill, of when you lose 15 guys that are on NFL fields right now, there has to be some drop-off, even if it's not a drop-off in the win column. Like, I think we got so spoiled by how legendarily awesome they were last year that it's tough to – because I thought Missouri had some dudes on the field and caused them some problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mentality. It's hard to repeat. It's hard to win week after week after week and get up for these teams. They were up for Oregon. Georgia certainly has the most impressive non-conference win of the season, that 49-3 win over Oregon. Oregon's looked great since. Georgia took it easy against Kent State, wasn't sharp, trailed almost the whole game against Missouri. It's just hard. It's just hard to do. I don't. If they had a huge game next week or the week after, I would have no problem thinking Georgia was going to roll through it. I just think it's really, really hard to stay on an elite level. Even Saban, you see the Tide doesn't play at the NFL level. Their talent dictates it should every week. So I don't have any concerns really about Georgia. I watched that whole game. They've got so many ways to beat you. They've got great tight ends. They got, the running game. Bennett is a great college quarterback. And then defensively, they still got dudes everywhere. So, Missouri got a little lucky here and there. They kept bombing 50-yard field goals, although that guy's a great kicker. He's not against Auburn, but he's a great kicker generally speaking.
Bill, when they were down 10 with like 14 minutes left, was there any thought in your head that they were that they were going to lose? There was none for me. I still thought they're 100% going to win. So I guess that's are they really struggling? I guess it will be when I have that moment where I'm like, oh, they're actually going to lose.
Right. And Alabama had the same type of what's going on here. It got to 28-23. Arkansas had all the momentum, and Young was hurt. It's 3rd and 15. They're backed way up. And then Jalen Milroe made the play of the game with that 75-yard scramble. That was amazing. And that turned everything around. You can talk about Gibbs and everything you want. That scramble by Milroe was the play of the game.
Now, that one I was 50-50 at that point. Like at the exact point that you just said, I was like, well, if they don't get this first down, this becomes a 50-50 game because you were the backup quarterback on the road. You made 2 special teams gaffes. Those are, like I said, I can't really put a finger on Georgia. I can tell you exactly what's wrong with Alabama is that their defense commits too many penalties. They've had special teams gaffes. The receivers have actually improved, but I was unsure about the receivers a little bit. But the penalties is, it's amazing that Nick Saban isn't bringing 2 or 3 headsets to the game because that's got to drive him crazy because that's what he coaches is discipline, emotional intelligence, those kind of things. And they commit a lot of dumb penalties on defense.
But in the end, it was impressive showing on the road, which they haven't been able to put together over the last 2 years, really. And they're going to have to do it again in Knoxville in a couple weeks. So that alleviated some of their concerns about why were they struggling on the road and that type of thing. So we will see what happens. They got a big one this week against Texas A&M, of course. But I'd say they're a worthy 1-2. I'd say it's a 1-2-3. I'd say Ohio State's right there too. Ohio State hasn't had the hiccups that either of those 2 teams have really had. The opener was the opener, but
we haven't seen them on the road yet. We'll be able to. I mean, they've spent the first month and change in Ohio Stadium, so I think we're going to learn that this Michigan State game, if they go up there and smack them around, I do think if you and me, if one of us was like Alabama's 1, 2 Georgia, and then my wife Kimberly came down here and said no, it's Ohio State, I would not. Well, first of all, I wouldn't argue with her, but I wouldn't argue with anybody because I think all 3 there's a case to be made for all 3, and I really don't have a problem with it.
Right. Yeah, definitely a tiered system right now. There's 3 teams in the top tier, and then kind of a free for all after that. Want to shift gears and talk about the Pac-12. Pac-12's revival. The league had not been to the playoffs since 2017. Everybody knows that. And then, this summer it was announced USC and UCLA are leaving to go to the Big Ten starting in 2024. So the funeral marches started for the conference all over the place. But at least through the first 5 weeks of this season, the league is thriving. 5 teams are in the top 25 right now. We talked about UCLA. They play Utah this weekend. It's one of the games of the week. This weekend, USC and UCLA they're obviously still leaving, but it's good to see the league somewhat healthy with even programs like Oregon State, Washington State, and Arizona kind of on the upswing.
Yeah, I mean, and I go by this. I mean, anytime your conference hasn't been in the playoffs since Washington in 2016, that was a really good Washington team. with college football fans and writers and media and they're creatures of the moment, and the Pac-12's in your face every week with a big game, which is good. I mean, last week it was Washington, UCLA. Yeah, it was tucked in late on Friday night, but big game. This week, I think Utah, UCLA is the best game on the schedule. I really do. And I mean, we'll talk about that more tomorrow as well. But if I had to watch just one game this weekend, it would probably be that, because I think Utah's just been super impressive. UCLA's undefeated. Utah, UCLA, USC, Washington, Oregon, all average over 40 points per game. And that's my standard. I don't know if that's an actual standard that somebody should hold to. That's my standard for a great offense. 40 points. If you average 40 points a game, you got a chance to beat everybody. And those 5 teams can do that. I stay up late and watch USC every week. I'm trying to figure out if they're a national championship contender. But the point being, even though it's late, no matter what window they're in, they have big games. They are more intriguing to me than the wide open Big 12 or the ACC dominated Clemson or the Big 3, not the Big 10. It's the Big 3. They're not more intriguing than the SEC yet, because the SEC has mastered that, having a big game in your face every week.
But yeah, so great timing by Pac-12. They've made a lot of missteps over the years, but getting rid of divisions for this year guarantees it's going to be a great championship game. You look at the Big Ten, that's not shaping up as a great championship game. You look at the ACC, that is not shaping up as a great championship game. Clemson Duke on paper right now is the ACC championship game. That's not pretty. But with the Pac-12 getting rid of divisions, they've got, like you mentioned, the 5 teams. I mean, it's Oregon, it's USC, it's UCLA, it's Utah. It's like whatever combination of the top 2 comes out of that Friday night championship game is going to be really relevant this year.
And we typically skip over that one. I mean, there's been years where, whether it's you or another editor I've had in the past, be like, "You're good. You don't have to even watch that." Well, you can watch it, but it doesn't impact Sunday. So it'll be interesting if that game finally impacts Sunday this year, and I think there's a chance that it could. And you just said it. I mean, I was doing the mental exercise in my head. Let's just, for fun, one could be USC Utah rematch. One could be Georgia Alabama. Then it could be Clemson Duke or North Carolina. The Big 12, you throw 2 darts at the wall. It could be Kansas versus Kansas State. And here's my favorite one. The Big 10 could absolutely be Ohio State versus Nebraska.
Or Illinois
or Nebraska. And I'm just telling you, that's going to be over pretty quick. So, I think that's the good thing for the Pac-12. And yeah, there's a lot of talk. Part of this too, and I'll throw this at you, I think USC and UCLA, and to some extent Washington and Oregon, you wonder, is this a Big Ten audition for them? Are they auditioning for the Big Ten? Not USC and UCLA, but are these other schools like, hey, we want in too? And, that's something to keep an eye on. I mean, I'm not saying that is why Oregon and Washington are good, but I mean, I've been impressed with Oregon. Bo Nix is having fun out there. Good for him. Another good story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So one of your overreactions, before we wrap it up here, one of your overreactions from Saturday night was we could have a college football playoff with no undefeated teams. Let's revisit that take. What made you think that, and who do you think has the best chance of getting in without a loss?
Well, I have a spreadsheet where I track all the unbeaten teams. I've done this ever since I've started doing this for Sporting News, and I just trim off each week. So I got down to 16 this week, right? And then you start to look at those 16 and you say, all right, how many of these guys are going to get through undefeated? I was generally curious in the playoff era, because I love the history of the game. So I was like, okay, everybody says this is like 2007. Let's get this out of the way, Bill. This is nowhere close to 2007. At 2007, there was something crazy going on every week. Until we get, and I always say this, till Alabama, I always say every year, every radio hit I do, I say the season doesn't really start until Alabama loses. Once they lose, then it opens up possibilities. So will Alabama lose a road game? Maybe. They could lose at Ole Miss or Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Would Georgia lose after seeing them be human? Maybe. I think the two teams that if I was at a Vegas betting window, I was like, these two teams are going to go unbeaten, be 13-0, are Ohio State and Clemson. And Ohio State, what if they go to Happy Valley and it's snowing and it slows down that offense? What if Clemson has a hiccup against Syracuse, which has happened in the past? I mean, I think this could be a lot like 2017 where it was the only year of the playoff era. We didn't have an unbeaten team, and it could create one hell of a one-loss pileup, which would be a lot of fun sorting out that one-loss pileup because we're not to the 12-team playoff yet.
Right. The Big Ten, Michigan or Ohio State will have to lose before the championship game. Neither of them are going to lose in the championship game. So if Ohio State loses to Michigan, Michigan would have to lose. It's sort of like last year, have to lose before that. And but yeah, it's a good point. I like, I'm not sure. I like Clemson's path right now, the way they're playing. They look good against NC State. Getting by NC State and Wake Forest back-to-back weeks, very impressive. And those are probably the two best teams in the ACC outside of Clemson. I'm not totally sold on Syracuse yet. So, I think Clemson has a good shot. But that would be interesting to, like you said, a one-loss pileup. That would be very fun to see what the committee would do there.
Well, I mean, and then when they did it in 17, it was confusing, but Alabama ended up getting in because they didn't have that second loss. And the only piece of the puzzle that mattered the most that year was Oklahoma beat Ohio State non-conference, and Ohio State had 2 losses. So that's what kept the Buckeyes out. Could happen. I mean, it could be. That's the definition of chaos in this current era is just different because, I mean, until Missouri closes that door and beats Georgia, or until Arkansas beats Alabama, or until Michigan gets beat by Maryland. I mean, those are the shakeups. I mean, we've been talking about NC State beating Clemson in a game of significance forever. Until somebody goes into Clemson and beats them, Bill, that streak's amazing. 37 straight at home.
No doubt. So, well, that'll wrap it up for today. Stay tuned for tomorrow's CFB Nation All-American Podcast. We'll be back Wednesday to look ahead, update our confidence contest. Spoiler alert, Trocchi making a move. And we will preview Week 6 games. Should be another great weekend. But the season doesn't start until Alabama loses. Sometimes the season never starts, Bill.
All right. It won't start till January at this rate.
Anyway, thank everybody for joining. We'll see you tomorrow.